Forget everything you've ever heard or seen about vampires in popular culture. Forget the elegant aristocrats gliding through the corridors of Gothic castles, the seductive immortals burdened with tragic fates, full of melancholy and romance, and definitely forget those sparkling heartthrobs from teen fantasies who look more like supermodels than monsters. All of that is nothing more than a glossy veneer, expertly crafted by Hollywood and novelists to hide something far stranger, more gruesome, and much more real. This is not a story about glamorous predators of the night. It's a story about the primal fears of humanity, about mass hysterias that swept across entire continents, and about the real-life vampire hunters who were contemporaries of the Founding Fathers and the Age of Enlightenment. Today, we're diving into a full-blown historical investigation. We'll pick apart the Hollywood fiction, separate it from the documented facts, figure out why our ancestors trembled in terror at the mere mention of the undead, and expose how a humble Irish writer who never set foot in Romania managed to deceive the entire world, creating a myth that lives on to this day. And if you stick around to the end of this video, I'll tell you the name of the very first vampire in history whose existence was officially documented in the archives. And believe me, it's not Dracula. Ready to step into the darkness? Then let's begin, not with dusty ancient legends, but with something much closer to home, to understand just how alive and powerful this fear still is. Picture this. The year was 2004 in the quiet Romanian village of Muratanu de Sus in Transylvania. While the rest of the world is buzzing about the latest gadgets and Hollywood blockbusters, here in the heart of Europe, the scene is unfolding that could have been cut from a 70s horror film. In the dead of night, under the cover of a thick fog, 6 men, ordinary farmers, fathers of families, armed with shovels, pitchforks, and torches, sneak into the local cemetery. Their target is the fresh grave of a fellow villager, Petro Toma, who had died just a few weeks earlier from a heart attack. With heavy breaths, they dig up the earth, break open the coffin, and drag out the body. Without a word, one of them drives a stake into the corpse's chest, another cuts out the heart, and a third starts a fire to burn the organ to ashes. They carefully collect the ashes, mix them with water, and give the concoction to a sick woman, a relative of the deceased, who they claimed was suffering from a mysterious illness that was sucking the life out of her. And miraculously, the next day, she allegedly begins to recover. This isn't a screenwriter's fantasy. It's a real documented incident that made headlines around the world. When the police arrested the men, they didn't resist and calmly explained. The deceased was a Strigoi, a vampire. He was rising from his grave at night, wandering the village and dreading the life from the living, especially his own family. The court sentenced them to 6 months in prison for desecrating a grave, but the local community stood by them, convinced that the ritual had saved their village from a curse. This story isn't just a bizarre anecdote from the countryside. It's the perfect entry point into our dark world because it proves that the primal fear of vampires didn't vanish with the advent of smartphones and science. It still lurks in the corners of the human psyche, especially in regions where tradition is stronger than enlightenment. And you know what makes this even more interesting? These cases aren't isolated. In 2009, in the Serbian village of Medveđa Golnji, residents performed a similar ritual on the grave to stop an outbreak of the flu, which they attributed to an undead creature. In 2013, archaeologists in Bulgaria found skeletons with iron rods driven through their chests, proof that even in the 21st century, the fear of the dead returning compels people to act. These incidents show how deeply the myth is rooted and force us to ask, where did it come from and why is it so resilient? To understand the origins of the modern vampire image, we need to travel back to the late 19th century, to Victorian England, where the architect of this entire mythos lived and worked, the Irish writer Bram Stoker. Born in Dublin in 1847, Stoker wasn't just an author. He was a theater manager for the legendary actor Sir Henry Irving and a passionate folklore enthusiast. In 1897, his novel Dracula exploded onto the literary scene, creating the canon we still honor today.
the Transylvanian Count, the castle in the mountains, the transformation into a bat, the fear of crosses and garlic. But how did Stoker conjure up this masterpiece? He had never been to Romania. His entire expertise was confined to the dusty shelves of the British Museum Library in London. There, like a skilled Lego builder, he assembled his world from disparate pieces. Tourist guidebooks to Eastern Europe, a couple of old, often inaccurate history books like Emily Gerard's The Land Beyond the Forest, and tales from his Hungarian friend Armin van Bury, a professor who shared anecdotes about Balkan folklore. Stoker made up details as he went along. He described Romanian dishes that never existed in reality, like paprika hindel, a concoction that sounds exotic but has no local equivalent. He even invented the word Nosferatu, claiming it was an ancient Romanian name for a vampire, though no one in Romania had ever heard of it. In fact, it's a corruption of the Greek word nosoferros, meaning plague bearer. But the novel's biggest secret is even more astonishing and reveals the Irish roots of the entire mythos. The plot about an evil, aristocratic count who rises from his grave in his castle, drinks blood, and can be killed only with a wooden stake was not drawn from mysterious Balkan legends as many believe. No, he borrowed it from an old Irish folktale about an evil dwarf king named Abhartach who terrorized the villagers in County Derry. According to the legend recorded in local folklore, Abhartach could only be permanently destroyed by being stabbed with a sword made of yew wood and buried upside down under a pile of stones so he could not climb out. Does that sound familiar? Stoker, being Irish, simply took this native legend, embellished it with Eastern European flavor, and relocated it to Transylvania to make the story more exotic and terrifying for a Victorian audience hungry for the mysteries of distant lands. And to add a layer of authenticity, he drew inspiration from real accounts of the 18th century vampire epidemic in Eastern Europe, where people were exhuming bodies on moss on suspicion of vampirism. Thus, Dracula is not pure fiction, but a clever mosaic of folklore, history, and imagination that forever changed our perception of the undead.
Now, let's figure out why Eastern Europe, specifically, became the cradle of the vampire myth. The vampire, or upir, as it's known in Slavic languages, from the Old Slavonic upir, possibly related to drink or to feast, is an indigenous Slavic undead creature with roots stretching back to pre-Christian times. The belief in it was not just a children's fairy tale, but a real catalyst for historical epidemics of fear that swept across entire regions. People of the past, living in an age without antibiotics or microscopes, did not understand the mechanisms of death and decomposition. They noticed that sometimes bodies in graves didn't decay as expected, due to low temperatures, soil conditions, or certain diseases. Corpses would bloat with gas, the skin would take on a ruddy hue from hemoglobin, and a dark fluid, liquefied blood or pus that looked like fresh blood, would seep from the mouth or nose. To an uneducated peasant, the conclusion was obvious. The deceased isn't truly dead. He comes alive at night, feeds on the blood of the living, and is even getting fatter from it. This fear was amplified during epidemics, the plague, cholera, or smallpox, when people in a village would die one after another. It was easy to believe that the first person to die was to blame. He was a vampire, sucking the life force from his relatives and neighbors from the grave, causing a chain reaction of death. Modern science offers simple explanations. Many vampiric symptoms were caused by porphyria, a rare genetic disease where the skin becomes hypersensitive to sunlight, hence the myth of fearing daylight. The teeth appear elongated due to gum recession, and urine turns a reddish color like blood. Another explanation is catalepsy, a condition where a person falls into a death-like coma and might awaken in their coffin, scratching the lid, hence the legends of groans from the grave. Or rabies. The infected would become aggressive, fear water, like vampires and holy water, and bite others, spreading the disease. But in those times, this sowed real panic, leading to mass exhumations and rituals. And these aren't just hypotheses. History is full of documented cases. Take the year 1725. An official named Frombold, sent from Vienna to investigate strange rumors, arrived in the Serbian village of Kisiljevo, then part of the Austrian Empire. The terrified local residents exhumed the grave of a peasant named Petar Blagojevic, who had died 10 weeks earlier. According to them, he was rising at night, wandering into homes and strangling his neighbors and drinking their blood. 9 people had allegedly died. In an official report sent back to the capital, Frombold wrote with horror, quote, "The body was completely fresh, without any odor. In his mouth, to our general astonishment, was a little fresh blood, and on his chest and stomach were marks as if from recent feeding," unquote. The villagers staked the body, beheaded it, and burnt it, and the panic subsided. This document, published in European newspapers, became the first official protocol of a vampire hunt and triggered the first international vampire craze. 7 years later, in 1732, a similar case occurred in the nearby village of Mivja with a man named Arnold Pullich. After his death, 17 people died, and his body was exhumed and found fresh with blood in its mouth. The report on Paul, written by a military physician named Johann Flumkinger, became a bestseller titled Visum et Ripertum and circulated throughout Europe, inspiring philosophers like Voltaire, who quipped, "Vampires are the new Jesuits." And in the 19th century, the hysteria crossed the ocean to New England in America, where it was fueled by another disease, tuberculosis or consumption. People didn't understand why their loved ones were slowly wasting away, going pale, coughing up blood, and losing their strength as if an invisible parasite was draining their life. It fit the vampire narrative perfectly. Families would go to cemeteries, dig up the graves of recently deceased relatives, and perform rituals to kill the undead and stop the curse. One of the most famous cases is that of Mercy Brown in 1892 in Rhode Island. The 19-year-old girl died of tuberculosis, followed by her mother and sister. Her father, under pressure from neighbors, exhumed the bodies. The mother and sister had decomposed, but Mercy looked fresh, with blood in her heart. They cut out the organ, burned it, and gave the ashes to her sick brother Edmund to drink, hoping for a cure. Sadly, he died 2 months later. But the ritual became a legend, even inspiring Stephen King's stories.
So how did our ancestors fight these monsters? Forget the Hollywood cliches of silver bullets and dramatic stakes to the heart. The reality was far more pragmatic and brutal. A wooden stake of any wood, not just ash, was used not for a symbolic killing of the heart, but to physically pin the corpse to the bottom of the coffin or the ground, preventing it from rising. The material had no magical significance. In Bulgaria, they preferred iron rods, in Greece, nails, and in Russia, oak stakes. Garlic, rosemary, and other pungent herbs, including even manure or salt, were used to ward off the undead with a strong smell. It was believed that vampires couldn't stand pungent aromas associated with life and purity. But the most radical methods were decapitation, so the soul couldn't return to the body, and complete cremation, leaving only ashes. In Poland and Serbia, those suspected of vampirism, often suicides, witches, or those who died a violent death, were buried with a sharp sickle or knife placed across their neck. If the corpse tried to rise, it would decapitate itself. In Romania, they practiced reburial. The body was dug up, turned face down, and its mouth was stuffed with garlic or stones, so it would bite the earth, not people. This wasn't romantic, it was a pragmatic, often brutal fight against the fear of the unknown, which sometimes led to tragedies. Innocent bodies were desecrated and families were ruined by superstition. But the panic didn't last forever. In 1755, the Austrian Empress Maria Theresa, tired of the chaos in her Balkan territories, sent her court physician Gerard von Swieten to investigate the cases in Serbia. Von Swieten, a rationalist and a student of the Enlightenment, explained everything scientifically. Decomposition depends on soil and climate. Blood is putrefactive fluid, and epidemics are caused by infections, not curses. His report led to an imperial edict banning exhumations and vampire hunts under penalty of law. Thus, the Enlightenment gradually suppressed superstition, but the myth had already taken root.
Now, let's talk about the most famous vampire of all, Vlad the Impaler, also known as Dracula. How connected is he to all of this? The answer is almost not at all. This is perhaps the greatest deception in the history of the myth, masterfully woven from politics and propaganda. The historical Vlad III, born in 1431, was not a mysterious count from Transylvania. He was the Prince of Wallachia, a small Romanian province who fought against the Ottoman Empire and Hungarian kings. The nickname Dracula, from the Romanian Dracul, dragon, he inherited from his father, Vlad II, a member of the Order of the Dragon, a knightly brotherhood founded to protect Christianity from the Turks. And the Impaler, Tepish, was a name given to him by his enemies, emphasizing his cruelty. Vlad allegedly impaled thousands of prisoners, creating forests of stakes. Yes, he was a harsh ruler in harsh times. The 15th century was an era of wars, betrayals, and executions, where impalement was a common practice, from the Ottoman Empire to Europe. But most of the stories of his atrocities are black PR of the time, spread by Saxon merchants and Hungarian opponents through pamphlets and engravings. These first yellow newspapers were made possible by Johannes Gutenberg's invention of the printing press in the 1440s, mass-produced leaflets with gruesome illustrations of Vlad feasting among the impaled spread across Europe, demonizing his image. The real Vlad was a complex figure. A patriot, a fighter against corruption, but also a tyrant. Bram Stoker, digging through a library, came across William Wilkinson's 1820 book, An Account of the Principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia, which mentioned a voivode, Dracula, as a cruel prince, and simply put this ominous, already hyped name onto his fictional character to add historical horror. Neither in folklore nor in reality was Vlad ever associated with vampirism. This was pure marketing by Stoker. And this is where the most incredible thing begins. Stoker's fiction proved more powerful than reality, creating a reverse effect. The novel was so convincing, with its detailed descriptions and pseudo-historical references, that people began to believe it as fact. In the early 20th century, a mob of peasants in Transylvania, having read cheap summaries of Dracula, stormed Hoyanari Citadel, Vlad's real fortress, and set it on fire, convinced that a vampire lived there. The book spawned a myth that took on a life of its own, mutating with each generation. And then Hollywood came along and turned it into an industry. In 1931, Bela Lugosi in the film Dracula made the vampire an icon of horror, an aristocratic villain with a Hungarian accent. In 1992, Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula added romance, turning the monster into a tragic lover searching for his lost beloved. Then came superheroes like Blade in 1998, where a vampire hunter fights his own kind, and even comedies like What We Do in the Shadows 2014, where vampires are hapless roommates in the modern world. And in the 2000s, Stephenie Meyer's Twilight completely humanized them, turning them into teenage idols who sparkle in the sun. This evolutionary path reflects changes in society, from the Victorian fear of sexuality in foreigners to the modern romanticization of the dark side. But behind it all lies the truth. Vampires aren't monsters, but a projection of our fears.
So who was that first real documented vampire? His name was Jure Grando Alilovic. He lived in the 17th century in the small town of Kringa on the Istrian Peninsula, now part of Croatia. According to the records of a local historian and priest, Valvasor, in his 1689 work, The Glory of the Duchy of Carniola, Grando died in 1656 from an illness, but began to terrorize the village for 16 years after his burial. At night, he would knock on doors, and those whose doors he visited would soon die. He would strangle his neighbors, draining their strength, and even pursued his own widow, appearing to her in her bedroom. The villagers, tormented by fear, finally gathered in 1672. 9 brave men, led by a priest, went to the cemetery, dug up the coffin, and found the body, fresh, with a smile on its face. When they tried to drive a stake through it, the body groaned, likely from gas, and only after decapitating it with a shovel and staking it did they stop the curse. This story isn't a Gothic novel. It's a record of real primal horror based on eyewitness accounts. It predates all other cases and shows how folklore blended with reality. In the end, the history of vampires is not a saga of supernatural predators, but a mirror of human fears, of unknown diseases that take our loved ones, of death that seems not final, of foreigners and others. Be it the Turks for Vlad or immigrants for the Victorians. It's also a story about the power of narrative, how a word, a pen, or a screen can create a fictional world that for millions becomes more real than fact. From Irish folktales to Hollywood blockbusters, vampires have evolved, but their essence remains, a reminder of the fragility of life. If this video has made you look at the night in a new way, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you had any experience with vampire stories? Subscribe so you don't miss more investigations like this, and hit the like button. It really helps the channel grow. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the truth is scarier than fiction.